Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Pei Beis, where 3 lines from the top says the Gemara. Amar le Rav Huna le Rabba Brei. Rav Huna turned to his son Rabba and he said, "My time lo shchichas kamed Rav Chizda. Why don't you frequent Rav Chizda? Why don't you go learn from him? The mechadadon shmaite, because his words of Torah are sharp, they're deep, they're analytical. Why don't you go learn from him?" Amar le. So his son Rabba answered his father Rav Huna, "My ezel gabe. Well, why should I go to him? When I go there, he sits me down and starts speaking to me about worldly matters, non-Torah matters. So why should I go to him? Amar li, he tells me, for example, Man da'ayel beis hakisei, one who enters the beis hakisei to relieve himself, lo yleisiv behedya, he should not sit down in a hurry. Rashi says b'mehiru b'chizek, with strength. V'lo litrach tfei, he shouldn't be too exert too much, to be too strenuous. Why? The high karkashta atlas shini Yosef, because the opening of the body, the rectum, it's supported by three teeth, three muscles. So if one is not careful, he tries to relieve himself in a hurry, or he exerts too much effort in relieving himself. Dilma mishtamta shini de karkashta, perhaps the teeth of the karkashta, the teeth of the rectum, meaning the muscle supporting the karkashta, the rectum, will sever, and v'asile sakana, and he can come to danger. Amar le. So his father responded, so Rav Huna responded to his son, "Who asik b'chaya de briyasa?" He's involved in very fundamental matters here. Chaya de briyasa, the life of a person, which is very important, maintaining one's health. And you say, yeah, he's merely involved in useless matters and worldly matters. It's very important for him to tell you these things. Maintaining one's health, one's body, is very fundamental to avodas Hashem, to service of Hashem. Kol shekain zil gabei, certainly, of course, the more so, a reason to go to him. As the Rambam tells us, maintaining one's health is so important. A person cannot proceed in Torah and mitzvahs, in avodas Hashem, without a healthy body. Hashem wrapped the neshama in the guf. He tied them both together, and the neshama, the soul, needs a stable guf to proceed in his service of Hashem in Torah and mitzvahs. So these lessons of Rav Chizda are very fundamental and very important. Continues the Gemara on the same topic. If one needs to wipe himself and he has a choice, he has before him a choice of a tzroir, a pebble, or a piece of cheres, of pottery. It's Shabbos. The tzroir, the pebble, is muktzah. The cheres, the piece of pottery, is not muktzah. So which one should he prefer? Rav Huna Amar, makanech b'tzroir. He should use the tzroir, ve'en makanech b'cheres, but not use the cheres, because it can endanger him on account of due to the sharp edges. It can harm him. Therefore, rather use the muktzah item than the cheres. Rav Chizda Amar, no, makanech b'cheres. He should wipe himself with the cheres. I guess he'll take care not to harm himself, ve'en makanech b'tzroir, rather than using the tzroir, which is muktzah. Says the Gemara, Meisvei v'akash from a brayso. Hoy lefan of tzroir v'cheres. If he has a choice of using either a pebble or a piece of pottery, makanech b'cheres, he should prefer the cheres, ve'en makanech b'tzroir, but he cannot use the pebble. To the Rav Huna, we seem to have a refutation of Rav Huna's shita, who told us rather use the tzroir than the cheres. Says the Gemara, Tirgma, Rafram bar Papa. So Rafram bar Papa interpreted. He answered the kasha, Kamei Rav Chizda, before Rav Chizda, Alib Rav Huna. So Rav Chizda was actually the one who disputed Rav Huna. But Rafram bar Papa, in front of Rav Chizda, explained this brayso in accordance with Rav Huna, that it could be compatible with his shita. Why does the brayso tell us that he should use the cheres and not the tzroir? What about the danger of the cheres? Says Rav bar Papa, This brisa is referring to a ba'oignei kelim, the lips of a utensil which is not sharp at all. It's rather smooth, and therefore the brisa tells in this case there's no concern of sakana. So certainly he should use the cheres, which is not muktzah and entails no danger. There's no danger involved. Therefore, use that better than the tzroir, which is muktzah. However, an ordinary piece of cheres which has sharp edges, perhaps in that case, Rav Huna would be correct in telling us to use the tzroir rather than the cheres due to the sakana. Continues the Gemara another machlekes. Hoylafon of tzroir v'asavim. He has a choice of using a pebble or grass. Rav Chizda v'Rav Huna. We have a machlekes between these two. Which one should he prefer? Chadam or mekanech b'tzroir. He should use a pebble, although it's muktzah. Ve'ei mekanech b'asavim, but not use the grass. Although one may use grass, it's not muktzah. But there's a concern, perhaps he might actually pull it out of the ground and do a malacha of tailish. So rather use the muktzah tzroir than get entangled in a concern of a malacha d'oraisa. So apparently, this shita holds it is better to do away with an issa d'rabbanan, a current muktzah. That's better than a chashash, a concern about a future malacha d'oraisa. V'chadamar, the opposing view holds no. Mekanech v'asavim, use the grass, which entails no malacha at this point. It's not muktzah. Ve'ei mekanech v'tzroir, rather than using the tzroir, which is muktzah. As Rashi points out, that the concern with using the asavim perhaps is the muktzah, is the fact that he might pull it out of the ground. However, there's no isser of actually using the asavim, the grasses which are connected to the ground. Why? Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi off to the side here on the right, beginning with the words ve'ena mekanech b'tzroir. So this shita holds rather use the grass than the pebble. The lav ba'atiltalu, because a tzroir is muktzah. Hilkach, therefore mekanech b'asavim, use the grass shem mechuber when they are connected to the ground, lo yazizim, and don't remove them. Don't pull them out of the ground. We know that one may not use a tree on Shabbos, etc. So why is there no issa to use something which is connected to the ground? This prohibition of using something attached to the ground only applies to a tree, or stiff reeds, because they're hard and stiff. But apparently there's no issa on using something which is soft and pliable like grass. So once again we have a machlekes between Rav Chizda and Rav Huna when he's faced with a choice, a decision. He use something which is muktzah, a tzroir, a pebble, or rather use something which is not muktzah, and really entails no issa whatsoever, like grass. However, there's a concern. If he's going to use those grasses, perhaps he might pull it out of the ground, do a malacha d'oraisa. So the question here is, do we go with a muktzah, a current muktzah, which is preferable over a concern, a chashash, a suffix of a future malacha? Or do we say no, focus on the present? Rather use something which entails no malacha now, like grass, rather than using something which is muktzah now, a stone. Continues the Gemara. Meisvei. How can we say that there's an option of using grass for wiping oneself? We have a brisa which tells us otherwise. Hamakaneach bedover. Shiur shaletas by. One wipes himself with something which is flammable. That's dangerous on account of kshafim. Sorcery might come affect him. Shina vatachtoinev noishras, his bottom teeth, meaning those muscles around the karkash of the rectum. Noishras, they fall out, they get severed. So we see one is not meant to use something flammable like these grasses. Says Malikash, it's not a kash. It depends what type of grass. Habalach. If they're moist, in that case, it is not regarded as a dover sha'ur shaletas, but it's not flammable, therefore it's mutter. Habi evasion, this brisa, which tells us not to use something which is flammable, is referring to dry grass, which indeed is flammable, and therefore there's a concern of kshafim affecting him. Now in the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah brings down that today, nowadays, that the Beis HaKisei is not found out in the field, so there's no concern about the kshafim affecting a person who uses the flammable items for kinuch. Okay, continues the Gemara with some pieces of advice on this topic. Hanichnas lifnois ve'eni nifne. If one has a need to relieve himself, but he resists that need, he resists the urge, that's dangerous. Rav Chizda, Ravina. We have a dispute between these two shitas. What is the consequence? What happens as a result? Chad Amar, one says, Ruach Roh sheletes bay. He'll suffer bad breath as a result. V'chad Amar, Ruach Zuama sheletes bay. His entire body gets affected by absorbing the waste, and the reach, the unpleasant odor gets absorbed in his whole body, permeates his whole guf, and his guf exudes this unpleasant odor. So if a person experiences any of these ailments, any of these conditions, so there's a need to investigate the source. What is causing this situation? So that depends on these respective shitas, Rav Chizda and Ravina. What indeed is the source of these situations? Says Gemara Tanya Kema de Omar Ruach Zoma Shalatas. We have a raya from a brisa to the shita that says that his whole body exudes an unpleasant odor as a result of resisting oneself. The sani is, we learned in a brisa, Hanitzuch Nakava Ba'oichel. One who has an urge to relieve himself and instead proceeds and eats. Doima, he's equated. It is similar to a letaner, to an oven. Shisaku, which was warmed up, which was fueled up al gav efra, on top of the ashes. So prior to cleaning out the oven, he already goes and reheats it. So it's similar to this person who doesn't prepare himself properly for his meal. V'zohi tchilas ruach zoma. V'zu, this behavior, he tchilas, instigates, brings about ruach zoma, this unpleasant odor exuding from his body. So this is a raya to the shita that says that the result of this behavior is ruach zoma exuding from his whole body. So if one has this experience, one has this situation, this ruach zoma, he'll know the root of it is that he's not preparing himself properly. So the lesson here is that a person should not resist that urge. It is unhealthy, and as the Gemara concludes, it can lead to ruach zoma. Continues the Gemara. What about a reverse situation? Hutzruach lefanos. If one has an urge, has a need, ve'ena yochel lefanos, he has difficulty bringing it about. Omar Rav Chizda, what is the advice for this type of person? How is he meant to induce his relieving process? Yamoid v'yeshev. Get up and sit down. He should get up and sit down, and this will encourage the relieving process. Rav Chanan Marado Amar, a different Eitzah Yistal Kutstaden. He should go to the other corner, meaning attempt on this side of the room and then go over to a different spot and attempt there. Rav Abnuna Amar Yimashmish B'tzroi, should manipulate, should massage with a pebble by Simokim in that area to encourage the process. Rav Baran Amri Yasiech Data. He should Masiech Das. He should distract his attention. Amar Lei Rav Achabre de Rav Rashi. How can you say it? This is an Eitzah? Kolshken Dechi Masach Daiti Lamefani. Certainly, if he distracts his attention, then it won't work. If he starts thinking about other things, other matters, and diverts his attention from the matter at hand, it's going to make it even more difficult. Amar Leis, he responded, no. They didn't mean to divert his attention to other things. Rather, Yasiach Datoi Midvar Macher. He should divert his attention from other matters and focus on the task at hand. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rav Yirmim Difti. I once saw this. I saw Chazili Autai. I saw this Ishmaeli, this Arab. The Kam V'Yosef. He got up, sat down. Until the waste poured out like a kedera, like a pot being emptied. Ton Rabbanan, we learned in the Bryce. Anichnas l'sudas kva. One is about to enter a permanent meal, a long meal, and he wants to avoid embarrassment from having to leave in the middle to relieve himself. So what is the good piece of advice we have for this fellow? Yahalech yud pa'amim shel arba abba. He should take 10 short walks, each walk containing 4 amas, and in between these short walks, he should attempt to relieve himself. V'amrila, some say dalet pa'amim. He should take 4 walks, So 4 times shall eser, each one containing 10 amis. And Rashi says this seems to be better according to the Shita because the longer walks will have a better effect on him. V'nifnei, he should relieve himself. V'nichnas, then goes into the meal. V'yeshiv m'koyim, sits down by his seat and has no concerns or worries. So in summary, we learned some facts about the Beis HaKisei. We learned initially that Rav Chizda imparted the following advice to Rabbah, the son of Rav Huna. When one enters the Beis HaKisei, he shouldn't sit down b'mehira, quickly, b'chayzek, with intensity. That's number 1. Number 2, he should not exert much effort at trying to relieve himself. That's dangerous for the muscles that are supporting the karkashta. When one is being mekanech, wiping, we have 2 disputes. One is, if he's faced with a choice of using either a pebble which is muktzah or a cheres which is not muktzah, which one should he prefer? We have a machlekes. We have a machlekes as well when one is faced with a choice of using a tzroyer pebble or asavim grass. The Gemara concluded we're speaking about asavim lach, moist grass which is not flammable. So we have an equal choice here. We have machlekes, which one to use. The Gemara tells us one should not resist the urge. If one would do so, it results in either ruach ra, bad breath, or according to the other shita, ruach zoma, his entire body exudes a unpleasant odor. We learned if one has difficulty relieving himself, we have several pieces of advice for this person. Either get up and sit down, or try in this spot and go over to the other spot and try again. We have another one who advises him to be mamashmesh b'yisim makim. You should manipulate, massage the area, or masiach daito, divert his attention from other matters and focus on the task at hand. Continues the Mishnah. Cheres, going back to the Shiurim, the minimum requirement amount for Haitzah Shabbos. So what is the minimum required amount of cheres, of a piece of pottery? Kedei litain ben patzem lachaver, a sufficient piece of pottery that can be placed between the rows of the beams. Rashi says they used to pile up the petzimin, the side posts or frames or beams. So when they piled them up one on top of the other, they'd place some piece of pottery between them to leave some space, to allow for some ventilation, that they should get dried up properly. And Rashi says to keep them in place, to keep them straight. So this is the shear, the required shear dimension of a piece of cheres, which has significance, and therefore there's a chiyuv for Haitzah on Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Remei Omer, a different shear, kedei lachtos boy esaur, a size sufficient to draw some fire, meaning to use it to draw at a coal from a fire. Rabbi Yossi Omer, kedei lekabel berevius. So the Mepharshim explained that it seems that Rav Yossi agrees with Rav Meir. If it's just a plain piece of pottery, the shear is for the coal. Rav Yossi adds, he says, well, if this cheres has an ability to receive a clay kibble, it can contain. Then even if it's kedei lekabel revius, if it has the shear of kabbalas revius, that is the shear of kli cheres, that is considered to be a significant piece of cheres. It can fulfill this function to be makabel revius. Now the Gemara will say that it seems from the Mishnah that Rav Yossi's shear is actually greater and larger than Rav Meir. We'll have a discussion in the Gemara. Continues the Mishnah. Amar Rav Meir, aval b'shein rai l'davar, even though I don't really have a proof that this function of a fire is indeed the suitable function for a cheres, and this denotes significance in chashivas. So this determines the size. I don't really have a raya for that, but zeich l'davar, I have some sort of indication from the following pasuk mentioned in Yeshaya Perek Lamed. So there the Navi is giving a klala to those who sinned, those who are doing averis, and he's saying, amongst their broken pottery, they won't even find a piece large enough. Lo yimatzei b'mechitasai. They won't be found in his broken pottery cheres, even a piece of pottery lachtos eish miyakit, sufficient to use it for this purpose of drawing a fire, an eish, a gacheles, a coal from a fire. So apparently this is the the suitable function, the proper use of a piece of pottery. So this is an indication that pottery is meant to be used for this, and therefore the size of the cheres is determined according to this use. Rav Yosi responds to Rav Meir. He responded as follows: Misham Raya, do you have a proof from there? Take a look at the last words of that same pasuk. The pasuk concludes, you won't have a piece of pottery for the fire, or to draw some water from this pit. Apparently, the pottery is meant for that too. Therefore, you can't bring a raya that pottery is suitable for the fire rather than for the drawing of water. Continues the Gemara. We have a question. Shiur de Rav Meir nafish. Is the size of Rav Meir greater or larger than Rav Yosi? Or Shiur de Rav Yosi nafish? Or is the shiur of Rav Yosi, who relates the pottery to the drawing of water, is that shiur greater or larger? Says the Gemara, Mistavra. It seems that Shiur de Rav Yosi nafish. It seems in the words of the Mishnah that the size of Rav Yosi's pottery is actually larger, because Rav Yosi tells us that we need one large enough to contain a revius of water. That seems to be a larger size than the shiur of Rav Meir, tells us merely enough to draw a coal from a fire, perhaps a very small, tiny coal, which a very small piece of cheres is necessary. So it seems from the Mishnah that Rav Yosi's shiur is larger. However, says we have a problem. Umikra, from the words of the pasuk, which is quoted in the Mishnah, it seems the opposite. Shiur de Rav Meir nafish, that the amount of Rav Meir is actually larger and greater. Why? Shiur de Rav Yosi nafish, because if you suggest that Rav Yosi's shiur, Rav Yosi's piece of cheres pertaining to the water is larger, is greater than Rav Meir's shiur, then how are we going to understand the pasuk? The pasuk issues a curse, a klala, to the sinner, saying that he won't even find in his possession a piece of cheres which is significant and could be used for a function. The pasuk says he won't find a cheres which is useful for fire or for water. Now, what would be the proper sequence of issuing the klala? It would be as follows. Not only won't he find something significant, something large, he won't even find something small. But if we say that Rav Yosi's shiur is larger, is greater, or Meir, then the pasuk is issuing the klala in the reverse. The pasuk is saying he won't find a piece of cheres in his possession which is suitable for a fire, which is very small, and he won't even find something suitable for the water, which is bigger. That's the reverse sequence of the proper way of issuing the curse. Says the Gemara, if you say that Rav Yosi's shiur is greater, then La'itla b'mana zutra, first the Navi issues a curse regarding a small piece of cheres only useful for the fire. That he won't have in his possession. And afterwards he issues the curse relating to the large utensil. Not only won't he find a small one, he won't even find a large one. That's the reverse of the proper sequence. First he should start with a large one. He won't find a large one, not even a large one, he won't even find something small which he can use. So the pasuk seems to indicate that the shiur of the fire is larger, and therefore that's mentioned first. So we seem to have a stira, contradiction between the pasuk and the Mishnah. Amrabai, masnisan nami. Even in our Mishnah, the cheres required for the fire is actually larger, greater than the one required for the water. Why? Lachtes eish, we're speaking about drawing a coal, from a large fire. So that indeed requires a large piece of cheres. You can't get too close, he'll burn. Therefore, he needs a large piece of cheres, and indeed the piece of cheres that Rav Meir is describing is actually larger and greater than the one Rav Yosi is describing, and indeed it's compatible with the pasuk, which tells us he won't find a large piece of cheres suitable for fire, and not even a small one suitable only for the water. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi, Misham Raya. He turns to Rav Meir, he says, how could you support your assertion that this cheres is meant to be used for fire from that pasuk in Yeshaya? That very same pasuk concludes with a reference of a cheres being used for drawing water. Says the Gemara, Shapir. Rabbi Yosi seems to have properly responded and refuted Rav Meir's raya. Says the Gemara, how does Rav Meir respond to that? The pasuk means to say as follows. You need not say. What do you mean you need not say? The pasuk says, it's needless to say, it's not necessary to say that something significant, something large, a cheres, which has the size which makes it suitable to be used for a proper function, to draw a coal from a fire, that's needless to say that this sinner won't find that amongst his possession. Something which is suitable, which is significant to people, that won't be found amongst his possession. Even something small and significant, something which is not considered to be significant to people. For instance, a small piece of cheres, which is suitable for drawing water, that's not considered to be a davar chashav. Even that, this sinner will not find amongst his possessions. So indeed, according to our mayor, the only thing which is regarded as significant is a large piece of cheres, suitable for drawing a fire. Perhaps fire cannot be drawn without using a cheres. Therefore, that is considered to be the suitable function of use of a piece of cheres. So that indeed is chashav, but a small piece of cheres, used merely to draw water, that's not regarded as significant use, a significant function. And this piece of cheres has no significance, has no chashivas. Perhaps the reason is because one can draw water with merely using his hand, his cupping his hand. So a cheres is not really required. Therefore, that insignificant use doesn't grant this small piece of cheres significance and chashivas. And therefore, if one should carry that on Shabbos, to Rosh Hashanah according to Meir's pot. So in summary, what is the minimum requirement for a piece of cheres, a piece of pottery? We have three shittas. Tanakama says, a piece which is suitable to be placed between one beam and the other, when they pile the beams one on top of the other. Rebbe says a large piece of pottery, suitable to draw a coal from a large fire. Rebbe tells us, I agree with that shita, but if it has the potential to receive, it's shaped in a way that it can contain something, then even a smaller piece of pottery, which is suitable to be mekabel, a revius of mayim, is sufficient and suitable as regarded as a davar chashav ha'yitzah Shabbos. Hadron aloch hamoitzi yayin. Continues the Mishnah. Amar Bekiva. Minayin l'avodah zara shemitama b'masa kanida. From where do we know? What is the source that avodah zara is metame b'masa? So an avodah zara, for instance, an idol, it gives off tumah. It's metame. Not only b'maga, if one comes into direct contact, he touches the avodah zara, but even through masa, and imparts tumah through merely lifting it, even without actually touching it. So it's an indirect contact. Even through masa, it is metame. How do we know that? Minayin avodah zara shemetame masa kanida, just as a nida is metame b'masa if one lifts her. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, tizreim k'moidava. You should scatter the avodah zara k'moidava like a nida. Tzei tomer, go instruct him to do so. So the pasuk equates, in somewhat of a manner, the avodah zara to a nida, and therefore we learn ma nida metama b'masa. Just as a nida is metama b'masa, avodah zara metama b'masa. So too, avodah zara is metama b'masa. If one lifts the avodah zara, he becomes tamei. Now it's interesting that this pasuk tizreim k'moidav is actually in the same perik as the pasuk mentioned in the last Mishnah. The klala of the Navi to the sinners, lo yimatzev machtisai. So Taisus indeed learns that is the reason why why we continue with the same, why the Mishnah continues discussing this topic with avodah zara, because it is a pasuk in that same perik as the pasuk discussed earlier. The Marshal points out actually that the klala, the curse issued in the pasuk earlier, that he would not find the cheres sufficient to use for any significant purpose, that was relating to the sinners of avodah zara. So indeed, there's a very strong connection between these two topics. Okay, so the Mishnah tells us that avodah zara is metame, and according to Rekiva, it is not only metame b'maga, also b'masa. Now we know that this tumah was a tumah d'Rabbanan, as Achsam Seifa points out. It brings a Taisus who tells us that it was enacted by the Beis Din of Chizkiah HaMelech. Says Achsam Seifa, who was that Beis Din? It was the Beis Din of Yeshaya HaNavi. So indeed, it's very fitting that this pasuk of Tizreim K'moidava, which teaches us the tumah here of avodah zara metama b'masa, is a pasuk in Yeshaya, because it was Yeshaya who actually implemented the tumah for avodah zara. Continues the Gemara. Tanan Hasam, we learned in a Mishnah in Maseches avodah zara, Misha haya beisay samach l'avodah zara. If one's home was close, was adjacent to a home of avodah zara, so they had a joint wall. V'nafal, and the wall collapsed. Also, he's not allowed to rebuild it. Why not? Because he's building an avodah zara. Keitzad yaseh. So what should he do? Koines l'seh shaloi dal damas. He must recede into his property. He must bring the wall 4 amas into his property, and can build there. Continues the Mishnah. What if the wall was jointly owned, meaning the wall was jointly owned, and the space underneath the wall was half his and half belonged to avodah zara? Nidun mechza al mechza. In this case, we counted mechza al mechza, meaning for the 4 amas which he needs to recede back into his property, he can only count the space of half of the wall to account for the 4 amas. Meaning, let's say the wall was 2 amas wide, he must recede an additional 3 amas, because he can include 1 amma of the thickness of the wall, which is his property. He can include that in the 4 amas, but he cannot include the second amma, the second half of the wall, which is sitting on the avodah zara property. The Mishnah continues, Avonov, ve'etzav, ve'afrav, its stones, its wood, its earth of the collapsed wall. Mitam and kesheretz, it imparts tumah like a sheretz, which means tumas maga. If one comes into contact with the stones of this wall, etc., he becomes tameh, just as a sheretz, for instance, a dead lizard is metame b'maga. As Tosfos points out, that apparently the wall itself was worshipped as an avodah zara, and each individual stone and piece of wood and offer was worshipped of avodah zara. Therefore, they have metame b'maga, and that explains why he cannot rebuild that wall. As we mentioned in the beginning of the Mishnah, unless he recedes into his own property, he can't go ahead and rebuild that joint wall, because he's rebuilding something which is actually being worshipped. Continues the Gemara. So the Avana ve'etzav v'afrav metame kisheretz, shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, shaket tishaktenu. So the Mishnah gives us the source for tumas avodah zara like a sheretz. The pasuk is regarding avodah zara, shaket tishaktenu. You meant to regard as a repulsive item, as we learned a drasha from here that shaket tishaktenu is a lashon of a sheretz. It's being shaketed like a sheretz, like a dead lizard, for instance. Therefore, it has a tumah like a sheretz. So this is the sheet of Tanakama, that the avodah zara is metame, but only a lenient form of tumah like a sheretz, and only metame b'maga, through direct contact, but not through masa, not through merely lifting it without actually touching it. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Kin nida, avodah zara is metame, a more stringent form of tumah, and is equated to the tumah of anida. Shenemar tizrein k'may dava. That's the pasuk we mentioned earlier. You meant to scatter the avodah zara like an ida. We see the pasuk is equating the two. Ma nida metam b'masa. Just as a nida is metam b'masa, af avodah zara, so to avodah zara metam b'masa. It can give off, it can impart tumah through masa, through merely lifting it, carrying it, without actually coming into contact with it. So according to Tanakama, we learn tumas maga by avodah zara from sheretz. According to Rekiva, we add tumas masa as well from nida. Now the Mishnah earlier mentioned that when one rebuilds his wall, he's going to recede to bring it back into his property for amas. Says Akashi, how can he do that? Isn't he benefiting the avodah zara by granting them part of his property? So the Gemara in avodah zara actually tells us that he's meant to fill up the area with thorns, etc., to render it unfit for use. Thereby, he's actually not benefiting the avodah zara at all. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rabba, Tizrein damakra. What is the drasha? What is the meaning of the word Tizrein? What are we going to be derish from this word? The pasuk says Tizrein k'may dava. Nachrinu min chakizar. The Torah is telling us you meant to estrange the avodah zara, distance it completely from you, like a zar, like a stranger. So the word zar, zayin reish, is included in the word Tizrein. It meant to teach us this halacha. So what is he teaching us? It says Tosfos as follows. We know that tumas avodah zara is merely a tumah d'Rabbanan. Now we're faced with 2 sources here. We can either connect it to sheretz, which is a more lenient form of tumah, tumas maga, or we could take it to nida, to connect it to the more stringent form of tumah, tumas nida, which is a tumas masa. Now, since it's a tumah d'Rabbanan, aren't we supposed to take the more lenient approach? L'kula makshinan, says Tosfos. So why do we find otherwise? Why do we find that Rabbi Akiva connects it to nida? So Rabbi will explain it to us. Rabbi will tell us as follows. The Torah here is explicitly telling us that we're meant to apply stringency to Tumas Avodah Zarah. Nachrunim v'chokizor. We're meant to totally distance it, estrange it from us. And therefore, all will agree, Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan will agree, that we're meant to connect it to nida, at least somewhat, as the Gemara will explain. V'amar Rab. Let's present the shitas as follows. B'masa the kuli amali pligi de matam. All will agree. Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan will agree that Avodah Zarah is matam b'masa. Daha iskish nida, because it is connected to nida, and we're meant to connect it to nida. And just as nida is matam b'masa, Avodah Zarah as well. Ki pligi. So what then is the point of disagreement? Be'even misama. Regarding this heavy stone, this even mesama, this placed stone, so it's a heavy, immobile rock. It's not meant to be moved around. It's not portable. As Hayes explains, it's heavy, and if something's underneath it, for instance, a chair, a seat, a couch, and there is a nida on top of this heavy rock, so these items underneath it don't really feel the weight of the person sitting on it. It's not really the weight is not really discernible. Nevertheless, the item underneath it becomes tamei. This is a chiddush that we learn from a pasuk that relates to a nida sitting on the heavy rock, or a zav, or a mitzvah. This is a very unique tumah, which is found by a nida. So the question here is whether we can apply that tumah to Avodah Zarah as well. So once again, ordinary tumas masa means lifting, carrying. That for sure applies to Avodah Zarah. That is learned from nida. The question is this unique tumah of sitting on top of a heavy stone. So an Avodah Zarah sitting on a heavy stone, will it be matame, something underneath it? Do we equate it to nida with regards to that tumah or not? So that is the point of contention. Again, keep pligi. When do they disagree? Be'even mesama, Rabbi Akiva savar, kenida. We meant to equate Avodah Zarah to nida. Ma nida matam be'even mesama, just as the nida is matame through even mesama. Av Avodah Zarah matam be'even mesama. So to Avodah Zarah is matam be'even mesama. So we equate it entirely, not only to tumas mas of nida, but also to this additional stringent tumah of tumas even mesama. For Rabbanan Savri, no, they hold no. We find that the Torah equates Avodah Zarah to nida, yes, but also to sheretz. Sheretz is sending us a message. Minimize that connection to nida. But Rabbanan Savri is sheretz. Ma sheretz loy matam be'even mesama, just as tumas even mesama certainly doesn't apply to a sheretz, which is only matame through maga, through direct contact. Not even tumas masa. Certainly not tumas even mesama. Just like a sheretz doesn't have that tumah. Af Avodah Zarah, which is equated, connected to sheretz, af Avodah Zarah loy matam be'even mesama. So once again, we have Avodah Zarah in the middle, and we have a choice of two connections. We have sheretz on one side, we have nida on the other. Say the Rabbanan, yes, we connect it to nida with regards to tumas masa. But sheretz on the other side is sending us a message. Minimize that connection. Don't learn everything from nida. Minimize that tumah. And only tumas masa will apply to Avodah Zarah, but not tumas even masama. Tumas even masama only applies to a nida, to a zav, to a person, not to a Avodah Zarah, which is merely an item, an object. That doesn't have that stringency. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, l'may hilchasa iskes l'sheretz. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, that we learn entirely from nida, we learn all the way from nida, tumas masa, tumas even masama. So, what's the point of connecting Avodah Zarah to sheretz? L'may hilchasa, with regard to what halacha iskes l'sheretz. Why was Avodah Zarah connected to sheretz? Says the Gemara to teach us something else. L'misham sheh, to teach us that the mishamshim of Avodah Zarah, the items used to serve as Avodah Zarah, not the Avodah Zarah itself, but the mishamshim, the ones that serve as Avodah Zarah, they don't have the same stringency chumah like Avodah Zarah itself. They are only tamei, a lenient form of tumah magal sheretz. Says the Gemara, Ulu Rabbana. Now let's go back to the Rabbana. L'may hilchasa iskes nida. L'masa. Why did the Torah connect Avodah Zarah to nida? For tumas masa, right? Meaning, Once again, we had sheretz on one side, we have nida on the other, avodah zarah in the middle. We connect avodah zarah to nida, but not all the way, because sheretz on the other side is telling us minimize that connection. Don't derive everything from nida. Only masa, but not tumas even masama. So at the end of the day, the bottom line, we're trying to learn tumas masa to avodah zarah. Says the Gemara, if that's the point, so why don't we find it more simple? Why didn't the Torah offer a more simple source for avodah zarah? For instance, nevela, which only has maga and masa, doesn't have anything else. So why do we need to go to nida and then sheretz to tell us to minimize the connection to nida? Why don't you go directly to something which only has maga and masa, nothing more? Let's see inside. L'Rabbanan, according to Rabbanan, l'may hilchasa is kashal nida. L'masa, but look, shirachman l'nevela. Why isn't the Torah connected to nevela? Then you no need sheretz in addition to nida. For the sheretz indicates how far to learn from nida. Go directly to something that doesn't have more than maga and masa. Says Ma'ina Chanami, you're right. But there's something which we learn from nida. We actually learn a leniency. Ella ma nida ena leivar, just as nida does not have a tumah by ivar, meaning a limb of a detached limb of a nida, does not have tumas nida. So we learn from there regarding avodah zarah as well. Af avodah zarah ena leivar, the tumah of avodah zarah does not apply to a limb, to a section which was taken apart. The avodah zarah was taken apart, so a section of avodah zarah will not have tumas avodah zarah. So that is the reason why the Torah connects it specifically to nida, so we can learn this additional halacha as well. Says the Gemara, if we know from nida that avodah zarah does not have tumah by ivaron, ve'ela had by Rav Chama bar Guri, we find that Rav Chama bar Guri asked, avodah zarah yesh leivaron, does the tumah of avodah zarah apply to ivaron, or ein leivaron, or not? So this is a question posed. Tifshat le'miha. Let him conclude from the above discussion that l'Rabbanan and leivar, that according to Shit's Rabbanan, certainly the tumah of avodah zarah will not apply to ivar, because they learned that from nida. So what's the basis of his question? It's very simple. We know that Rabbanan hold there's no tumah of avodah zarah by ivar. Says the Gemara, indeed, Rab Chama bar Guri, he didn't pose this question based on the Rabbanan. It was al liba Rabbi Kiva boila. It was in accordance to Shit's Rabbi Kiva, where he asked this question. And indeed, according to Rabbi Kiva, we aren't sure about this halacha. Rabbi Kiva connected entirely to nida. He says just as nida is matam v'masa, is matam v'mesama. Those tumas apply to avodah zarah. Perhaps he applies it to nida entirely, and just as we find this leniency by nida, that the tumah doesn't apply to ivarim, that will be applied to avodah zarah as well. Or perhaps no, he only applies to nida with regard to chumrah, to stringencies, but not with regard to leniencies. We're unsure and uncertain, and that was the basis for Rav Chama bar Guri's question. So in summary, we have Rabba's approach to the machlekes of Rabbi Kiva and Rabbanan. We have avodah zarah in the middle. We have on the right, we have sheretz for tumas maga. We have on the left nida for tumas masa. Says Rabba, all will agree. Rabbi Kiva and Rabbanan both agree. We connect avodah zarah to nida with regards to tumas masa. Rabbi Kiva says, go all the way. Learn not only tumas masa, but also tumas even masama. The Rabbanan, however, say no. Tumas sheretz tells us that we're meant to minimize that connection to nida. Don't learn all the way from nida, only partially, only tumas masa, but not tumas even masama. Why indeed does the Torah connect avodah zarah to nida? To tell us a leniency as well, that the aver of avodah zarah will not have tumas avodah zarah. According to Rabbi Kiva, why does the Torah connect avodah zarah to sheretz? To teach us the halacha of maga, tumas maga, when it comes to the mishamshim of avodah zarah, the utensils used to serve as avodah zarah. Continues the Gemara. Another approach to the machlekes. Rabbi Lezer Amar, he presents the machlekes a little bit differently. He's more lenient. He says, be'evan masama, when it comes to the stringent form of tumah of evan masama on this heavy stone, kuli amule pligi delay matama. All agree that avodah zarah will not have the tumah. This tumah is unique to a person, to a nida, to a zav, to a mitzvah. It doesn't apply to an object like avodah zarah. Ki pligi. What is the point of contention? When do they disagree? When it comes to tumas masa. Rabbi Kiva Savar, Kenida. We connect avodah zarah to nida. Ma nida me'etama v'masa. Just as a nida is me'etama with masa, af avodah zarah me'etama v'masa. So we apply tumas masa to avodah zarah just as we find by nida. Rabbanan say no. Kisheretz. we connect Avodah Zarah to sheretz. Ma sheretz loy metama b'masa, just as sheretz is not metama b'masa, only maga. Av Avodah Zarah loy metama b'masa. So according to Rabbi Lezer, we go down a step. When it comes to tumas even mesama, this heavy stone, all agree that tumah doesn't apply to Avodah Zarah, which is merely an item, an object that's unique to people, to zav, to nida. An object, an item like an idol, like Avodah Zarah, does not have this tumas even mesama. The machlekes is regarding tumas masa. Rav Akiva says we learn from nida. We bring over tumas masa to Avodah Zarah. Rabban say no. We derive from sheretz that only tumas maga will apply to Avodah Zarah, not tumas masa. Says the Gemara, Rav Akiva, l'may hilchasa iskas l'sheretz. According to Rav Akiva, we don't seem to learn anything from sheretz. So why does the Torah connect Avodah Zarah to sheretz? L'masham sheretz, to teach us that the item servicing the Avodah Zarah will have the leading form of tumas maga. And conversely, the Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, l'may hilchasa iskas l'nida. Why then did the Torah connect Avodah Zarah to nida? We don't seem to learn anything from nida according to the Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, we learn a leniency actually. Ma nida eina levarim, just as the tumas nida doesn't apply to a limb of a nida, as mentioned earlier. Avodah Zarah eina levarim, tumas Avodah Zarah will not apply to a part of Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah came apart. We have the sections here. They will not independently be metame. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Akiva, l'may hilchasa iskas l'nida. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, the connection to nida is as follows: just as nida is a metame masa, so to Avodah Zarah is metame masa. Now, why does the Torah connect it to nida? Why don't we simply connect it to an avela, which only has masa, rather than nida, which has masa, has also tumas eved mesama? Why not simply to nevela, which merely has maga and masa, which is the most simple limud? Rabbi Akiva, l'may hilchasa iskas l'nida, l'masa. Was it for tumas masa? Look shel nevela. Why don't we simply connect it to nevela? Why doesn't the Torah connect Avodah Zarah to nevela to teach us tumas masa? Says Gemara, you're right. But we learn a leniency from nida. Elama nida eina leivarim. So just as the Rabbanan learned a kula from nida to remove tumah from a var, Rabbi Akiva will learn the same as well. Ma nida eina leivarim. Just as by nida we find that the tumah doesn't apply to an avar of a nida. Af Avodah Zarah eina leivarim. Says the Gemara, Ella ha debayram b'cham b'gurya. If so, how are we going to understand the question posed by Rav Cham bar Gurya? Avodah Zarah yesh leivarim, or eina leivarim. Does the tumah of Avodah Zarah apply to portions of Avodah Zarah, parts, or not? Tifshad le'miha. Why can't he conclude from this discussion that Bein l'Rabbanan, Bein l'Rabbi Akiva, both cheetahs, both agree, the eina leivarim. We learn from nida this leniency that the tumah will not apply to a var. So what was the basis of his question? Says the Gemara. You're right. If Rav Cham bar Gurya would have approached the machlekes the same way Rav Lezer approached it, then he had no question, because according to Rav Lezer, the derivation of nida is exactly to tell us this halacha, that there's no tumah var. Rather, he took Rav Rabba's approach in presenting the machlekes. Says the Gemara, Rav Cham bar Gurya kirabba masni. He presented the machlekes or Rav Akiva Rabbanan the same way Rabbah did it. And based on that, he had a question, because Rabbah's presentation was that yes, according to the Rabbanan, we learned from nida that the tumah will not apply to Ivar, but we were unsure about Rav Akiva, whether or not there's a tumah to Ivar or Avodah Zarah. And therefore, that was the basis of Rav Chama bar Gurya's uncertainty. Rav Chama bar Gurya masinla, says the Gemara, Rav Chama bar Gurya masni. He learned like Rabbah, and therefore ubayla. He posed this question. I'll leave it to Rav Akiva. According to Rav Akiva, he was uncertain whether we meant to learn entirely from nida and apply a leniency, a kula that we find by nida to Avodah Zarah, to not have tumas Avodah Zarah by Yivarim, or perhaps we'll only connect Avodah Zarah to nida regarding chumas, but not for a kula. So in summary, we have two approaches to the machlekes between Rav Akiva and the Rabbanan with regards to tumas Avodah Zarah, which was a tumah applied mid Rabbanan to Avodah Zarah. We have two psukim, one pasuk in Sefer Yeshaya, Tizreim Kimoidava, which connects the Avodah Zarah to tumas nida. We have another pasuk in Devarim, which provides a asmachta support to the concept of connecting Avodah Zarah to tumas sheretz. So we have Rabbah's approach, which is that all agree that Avodah Zarah is metame b'maga. All agree that Avodah Zarah is metame b'masa as well, because we learn from Nida. Rabbi Akiva says not only is it metame through ordinary masa, but even through tumas even misama. If the Avodah Zarah is placed on this heavy rock, heavy boulder, it is metame, an item which is underneath that rock. According to Rabbanan, no, that tumah that only applies to a nida, to a zav, to a person, but not to an Avodah Zarah. It's not, the weight of Avodah Zarah is not discernible, it's not felt by the item underneath it. So only a person who actually sits on that stone will be metame something underneath it, because the person actually still sitting on that thing, he relates to the item underneath as well. But an item that is measured by weight, if it doesn't really weigh down considerably, it's not felt on the item underneath, there's no tumah there. So according to Rekiva, even Masama applies to Avodah Zarah as well. According to Rabbanan, it does not apply to Avodah Zarah. The Gemara tells us that according to Rabbanan, there's no tumah to a worm of Avodah Zarah. That we learn from Nida as well. Just as the tumah does not apply to an aver of a Nida, it won't apply to an aver of Avodah Zarah. According to Rekiva, we're left uncertain. Rabbi Lezer's approach is that, yes, all agree that tumas maga will be applied to Avodah Zarah. That is learned from Sheretz. The machlekes is regarding tumas masa. Rabbi Akiva holds yes, tumas masa will be applied to Sheretz as well. That is derived from Nida. According to Rabbanan, there's no tumas masa by Nida. All agree that tumas even masama will not apply, and all agree that there will be no tumah applied to an aver of Avodah Zarah. The Gemara told us that Rabbi Akiva will use the connection to Sheretz to teach us the tumah of the mishamshim of Avodah Zarah. All agree that the items, utensils used to serve as Avodah Zarah are only metame tumas maga. Okay, time for a chazara on today's daf. We began with a discussion of Beis HaKisei. One is not meant to relieve in a hurry or intensely. It's dangerous to the muscles in that area. We had two discussions regarding muktzah. If one is faced with the choice of a pebble or a piece of pottery, which one is he meant to use? Or if one is faced with a choice of a pebble or grass, which one is he meant to use? We continued discussing the need to relieve oneself. One should not resist that need. It can result in, the Gemara says, if one resists, it will result in reach ra, and bad odor, or according to one shita, the entire body will exude an unpleasant odor. If one has difficulty relieving oneself, the Gemara gives us 4 pieces of advice. Get up, sit down, or go to a different location and try again, or massage the area, or divert attention from other things to the task at hand. The Gemara continued discussing the minimum requirement for a cheres, a piece of pottery, regarding Avodah Shabbos. We have 3 shitas. According to Tanna Kama, a piece which is large enough to be placed between the beams. According to Meir, a piece of pottery sufficient to draw a coal out of a large fire. According to Rav Yosi, he agrees with that, and he adds that if it has the ability to receive, it's a receptacle, it can receive some water then. Even if it's smaller than Rameir's share, if it has the ability to receive a revius of water, that is sufficient. We proceeded with the Mishnah, which told us that there's a tumah applied to Avodah Zarah. We have a machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan. Rabbi's approach was that all agree Avodah Zarah will have tumas masa. The question is regarding tumas even mesama. According to Rabbanan, there's no such tumah by Avodah Zarah. According to Rabbi Akiva, there is. Rabbi Lezer says all agree regarding tumas maga. Machlekes is regarding tumas masa. Rabbanan say there's no tumas masa by Avodah Zarah, and Rabbi Akiva says yes, there is.